That the only thing we have to fear is itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 2018 and the Fear of God podcast. Clearly, this one's going to be a rough one on so many levels. So, more or less with you right now is Nathan, your typical co-host. Usually with me is Reed, but he said something about needing to go get a Brazilian wax. But he did say that on the way back, he'd bring some finger food with him to the recording. So, I mean, I think I know what some of this stuff is he's talking about, but I'm a little confused. I mean, I'm all about, if you need to manscape and all that sort of stuff, it's a new era, it's a Me Too moment. I don't know, I guess. But Reed, I would be more emphatic, but I just can't force my vocal cords to do it.
No, I was going to say your vocal cords sound a bit raw.
Oh, yes. That was nice. That was good.
Oh, my gosh. Man, I am so sorry that we're having to podcast where your voice is on its last thread of life.
Yeah, well, let it not be said that I am not devoted.
You're utterly dedicated. No, everybody admires your stick-to-itiveness, as it were.
By the end of our recording, it will be merely a whisper.
Well, I'll go ahead and take over and give you some rest to let everybody know what we're going to be talking about today. Because yes, I am back, and I've brought my finger foods. And I did not go through with the aforementioned activity that you said I might be, because the very thought of it gives me a full body rash, hives all over my body.
Wow.
No, not at all. But no, so when we were talking about this series, there were several films that got bandied about that we might include in this sort of hashtag Rear Window retrospective, some of the films of 2017, some of the most provocative. And one of the things that stood out to me, there was a couple of reasons why, I won't say I pushed you to see this film. I mean, I nudged. I definitely nudged. But
it was strong, compelling.
Yes. I kept bringing it up. Is the thing.
You did.
But obviously, we spoke about It Comes at Night. We knew we wanted to talk about Mother. And then next week's episode is also a no-brainer. Stay tuned, everyone. But to fill this slot, there were a couple of different options. I mean, there have been some very interesting films out this year. In fact, listeners voted on a top 10 favorite list of horror films from 2017. So tune in next week to hear what the results of that list were and what your favorite films were. There were several on that list that were candidates for this, opportunities for this. But I really wanted to do a couple of things. First, I still feel a bit remiss that the only foreign language film we've covered in 70 plus episodes of The Fear of God has been Train to Busan, which is a great episode. Everybody go back and listen to it if you haven't. But I wanted to cover another foreign film. And then also, this one made a lot of waves in the festival circuit. This was a controversial, very impactful film to a large number of people. And I wanted an opportunity, because I think there are some very interesting things in it to talk about. So we are going to be talking about of course, 2017. I actually believe it was made in 2016 and ran the festival circuit then, but it was released widely.
You're correct.
Yeah, okay. It was released widely in 2017. I'm going to butcher this lady's name. No offense whatsoever, but the director, Julia Ducournau I don't even know if that's right, but I'm just going to say Julia Ducournau. And she's obviously a French director, and her film is Raw. So not raw as in like an adjective. That's the name of it. It's called Raw.
Although admittedly it is a bit raw as an adjective.
It's a bit raw. Yeah. The adjective also applies. So before we talk about that, we're going to be, I feel very proud of us at this moment. We're going to be talking about, a foreign film directed by a female director, no less. So I feel very, self-proud, as it were. I'm just going to go ahead and call out my own hypocrisy. But before we do that, before we dive into this wonderful French film, Nathan, I have to ask you, what you watching? What you reading? What you listening to?
Oui, oui. That was I want to say I've heard better attempts at French, but none that come to mind. So congratulations.
It's pretty bad.
So
it was pretty bad.
So apologies to everybody for just how terrible I sound, but we'll get to the finish line somehow.
We'll make it there,
or we'll get a ski pole to the back. So watching and a reading for me.
All right.
So I did start watching. You and I have talked about this off pod, though I don't think we've actually brought it up on the show. I did, and speaking of foreign language enterprises to be found on Netflix, I am 5 episodes into the Netflix German series Dark.
Which I've heard great things about.
They are pretty accurate. I mean, like, it's like I'm still pretty, clearly I'm at the halfway mark, so 5 out of 10 episodes. Like, I don't know how they're going to land the plane currently, but in terms of pure atmosphere and mood, it's very strong. Production value is extremely strong, really strong ensemble cast. It does make some interesting choices for its narrative that I didn't totally not see coming, but I also didn't know they were going to do. So it was kind of cool when this took place. I'm trying to be intentionally vague there, but I would highly recommend it. I don't know, given the volume of its content, that we would ever necessarily do like a one-off on it, a one episode on it, but it is very much in kind of Fear of God wheelhouse in terms of the tone and the, some of the narrative structure and genre elements and things like that. But no, I really dig it. I had heard it pitched as kind of a variant on the Stranger Things kind of approach, and it is very much that. So like, there's a lot of that sort of vibe going on.
Gotcha.
But it does some very different things that I don't know. Like, I like Stranger Things 1 a lot, as we all know. I didn't like Stranger Things 2 a lot, as we also all know. This is kind of a more grounded take, just in terms of the delivery on that sort of idea.
Gotcha.
So,
okay. All right. Yeah, I've been very
I've
curious.
I've got one more, but I don't know what you've got, so I'm happy to ping pong if you want.
Yeah, let's ping pong, because I've actually got a couple. I definitely want to check out Dark. Dark's been on my radar ever since it dropped on Netflix, so I'm very anxious to finally get around to it. So the first one that I'll mention, I'm going to mention another TV show. I was going to spread these out, but I have 3 things that have been just like etching into my brain that I've been dying to talk about. So the first is, I've meant to bring this show up for a while now. It's on Netflix. The first season is available on Netflix. The second season is currently airing on broadcast. I forget the network right now, but have you heard of a show called The Good Place?
I have heard of a show called The Good Place, and I've heard very good things about The Good Place.
Nathan, I love this show. This show is... I love it so much. So all I will say, I'll say 2 very specific
unfortunately,
things.
I do know the spoiler to the end of season 1.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Crap. That was such
it's
a great...
difficult to avoid, yeah.
Oh, that was such a great reveal. That said,
I don't know how it's deployed, so like...
Oh, okay, okay.
Though I sort of know the turn, I don't know, like...
So
it comes up.
Okay, so that's one thing. So there is a major spoiler at the end of season 1, but even more so than that, the entire show has a rhythm that every couple of episodes they throw. It reminds me. So if you can imagine the mysteries of the island on Lost taken with a far more comedic, a more comical tone. There's frequently episodes where, like, there's a random episode in season 2 that, like, right in the middle of it, they introduce sort of a rule, and that rule has been in play the entire time, but we didn't know it, and so the show has a habit of every couple of episodes throwing you a bit of a curveball. And I remember I've said this multiple times to my wife. I said, I love being able to watch a show that I genuinely have no idea where they're going. No idea. I have no idea where the story is going to land. The show is all about, for those who don't know anything about it, the premise is Kristen Bell's character, whose name is Eleanor Shellstrap. She dies, and in the opening scene, she shows up in The Good Place. And her, the lead of her neighborhood in The Good Place is Ted Danson, who's an angel named Michael. And he is basically...
I thought that was John Travolta.
I know, right? No, that's a totally separate movie.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
season 2. That's the twist.
That's the twist. It's actually, he takes off the mask. It's John Travolta. So, so basically, I will tell you, I will spoil for everyone the surprise twist at the end of episode 1. And then there are multiple.
I was about to say, Reed, come on, man.
No.
Let us watch the show.
No, at the end of episode 1, because there are twists aplenty throughout the season. But basically, she winds up in the good place, and she's wandering around. She's got her own personalized home, a soulmate, all this other kind of stuff. And then at the end of episode 1, it reveals, wait a second, something has gone terribly wrong. I don't belong here. They keep confusing me with somebody else. It's not really me, or there's another person with a similar framework or anything like that. Like it's not me. I don't belong here. So that's the twist at the end of episode 1, is that she has somehow mistakenly wound up in the good place. And then there are a multitude of other twists as they introduce new characters and you begin to learn more about this world. And what I love about the show is the show really is, as so many of other shows are, about what it means to be human. And I love that they take these quirky, inventive little observations to do that in this very life and death, heaven and hell kind of motif. I personally love the show. I mean,
I've heard.
Go ahead.
I've heard nothing but good things about it. And in fact, 2 things. One, I hope, because I love Mike Schur, even though I didn't watch The Office, but that's a whole other conversation. I do hope this may get you back around to Parks and Rec, because that's a wonderful series.
Oh, okay.
But
sure.
You referenced this a second ago, and I don't know if you know this, but Mike Schur actually reached out to and developed a friendship with Damon Lindelof specifically to talk to him about the narrative structure of Lost and how he can apply it to The Good Place in certain fashion.
That is so funny. Yeah. I did not know that. I never knew that. But now that I do know it, I see it, and it's evident in the narrative beats of the show. They do by my standards, an exceptional job of keeping you unaware of where the next wrinkle is going to come. And part of it is at this point now, they've got about 6 or 7 characters that they juggle, and each of those characters have specific arcs that influence the narrative in different ways. So, but it's outstanding. I love it. I'll mention my second one, then I'll pivot back to you. The second one's a little heavier, and then I'll end on a really light note. So the second one, it's surprising that I said it's heavier given who I'm about to name drop. But so Dave Chappelle has recently done 2 more Netflix specials. They're in one little grid. They're just called like a collection or whatever. So, but these. Of the 2, the first one, called Equanimity, is very much a comedy stand-up special. There's some moments of poignant philosophical observation, but for the most part, it's a standard comedy stand-up special. If you like Dave Chappelle and you like his stuff, you will probably like it. But the second one is the one that really sort of blew me away. It's called The Bird Revelation, and it is a stand-up special, but of the 49 minutes, there are probably only about 10 to 12 minutes of jokes, and there's 30 minutes of philosophizing, and he makes some controversial statements and some very pointed observations, and I have to admit that at least 3 times I had to stop watching the thing so that I could take note of what he had just said, because he makes some profound observations. He's talking specifically about the hashtag #MeToo movement, and some of the celebrity outcasts that have come as a result of that. I won't say anything specific about the observations he makes. I'll just say that if you listen to him, it's likely there will be a handful of things you won't agree with and might even slightly be offended by, but there's also going to be a few things peppered in there that I think you will take pause and go, that is a very powerful thought and something worth considering and thinking about in the long run of things. For those who know Dave Chappelle, know his brand of humor, and know his brand of specific philosophizing, I would recommend checking out those specials. And then
F your couch.
That's right. Exactly. Which he has a new catchphrase that he introduces in Equanimity. I can't even repeat it here, and it's Dave Chappelle.
You can. We're friends.
No. I can't. But he is who he is for a reason. He knows what he's doing in terms of just how to approach certain subjects and how to do certain things. But anyway,
well, I don't know how heartily I can endorse the sort of point of it, but his superhero running joke in one of the more recent stand-ups is pitch perfect.
Oh yeah.
Set up and pay off. You know what I'm talking about?
I think it was in his I think it was in the one of the ones that he dropped on Netflix this last time, right?
Yeah. But it's the superhero bit where he says if the superhero did this one really terrible thing but also did all this other good stuff, what would you think of him? Do you remember the payoff?
I don't remember the payoff, not offhand.
Well, he juxtaposes this running bit with another running bit about Cosby.
Oh, right, where Cosby bought the microphone that Martin Luther King delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech on, right?
Oh, that I don't remember, but I think you just wanted to say Martin Luther King Jr. on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But
right.
No, it's too intricate to lay out exactly what it is, but there's just a really fantastic and pure in terms of pure oratory skill, it's pretty fantastic.
He's good at what he does, man. He is.
Anyway, well, cool. That's good to know in here. And again, F your couch. So, for what it's worth, I'm as sort of disheartened at the state of my voice as y'all might be hearing it, but I'm going to plow forward. So, I don't know how eerily prophetic you knew you would be, Reed, on almost any level, really. But you're awesome, man. You're so cool.
That's what it is. I'm awesome.
When you positioned the sort of tagline of this podcast as the beginning of wisdom, not the end of the conversation, and in the spirit of that, I've been on a reading frenzy this year. I actually just finished my third of the same author today, in fact. And it's so ironic re-listening to a Rear Window conversation and my discussion on semantics.
Right, yes.
To have completed the book you did give me for Christmas, David Gushie's Still Christian, the subtitle of which is Following Jesus Out of American Evangelicalism.
Yes.
And it was just it's interesting. The book reveals itself pretty quickly to be a memoir, which I was not really expecting, and honestly was slightly disheartened by at initial take. But I'm so happy it ultimately is memoir because, one, even though he's probably about at least 15, maybe close to 20 years my senior, a lot of his personal experience in terms of being in the hot seat and aware of the cultural Christian moment we've been in the last 25 years, there was a lot of anchor points I remembered and knew and that sort of thing.
Right.
But he ultimately reaches this place of just being kind of like, I am a Christian. He has effectively sort of, and there's a lot more that could be said here, but he effectively sort of renounces kind of the label of evangelical, but more than that, and I would listeners of this show, if you're on episode 71 with us, you're pretty swell folks, and I want to think
love you.
pretty discerning people. And it's weird because I read these in tandem, so I'm going to encourage them in tandem because they almost are two parts of the same whole. So I read Still Christian and then immediately finished it based on some of its latter content and got his book called Changing Our Mind. If you go look these books up. Changing Our Mind just had a 3rd edition. Be sure you get the 3rd edition because it's got some ancillary back matter that is new to as of September. Changing Our Mind specifically is about the conversation of LGBTQ inclusion in the life of faith of the church. And I'll spoil the ending for you. He is an advocate and now ally, and he would term the reason I'll preface this the way I did is because I listened to a podcast of him talking today, and it's interesting because he says what happened to him, and he's got an impressive CV. He's got an impressive resume. So he's been involved with things, if you're in ministry or aware of ministry or around ministry that you're aware of, like his hand has touched certain things that you'd be aware of. And in this podcast conversation I was listening to of him today, he talks about how all the disinvitations and how the well dried up for him vocationally on a certain level because of this newfound position he began to endorse. But the bigger point is what he tries to drive home is and there's so much that could be going into here. I'm going to try to just sort of make a real narrow path here. But he says the biggest problem he sees is we've rejected a conversation. Like, he definitely says it's a problem that we reject LGBTQ people writ large, but more than that, he says we've rejected the conversation about their inclusion. And how disheartening and troubling that is. Like so much of we've used this nomenclature before, the 81% who would, and again, these are broad strokes, I get it, but who would just ignore even the conversation. Right. And so anyway, tying that into what you and I do, I'm grateful that, and maybe I'm building a backdoor defense of myself here too, but it's a conversation, we and not just you and I, Reed and Nathan, or you, I, and our listeners, but the life of faith should be a conversation. It should be an ongoing pursuit of deeper faithfulness and richer maturity that does not necessarily shut down things that should continue to be talked about. Anyway,
sure.
These are both relatively easy reads. Still Christian and Changing Our Mind. They're, I think, max probably like 200 or 250 pages each. I was on vacation when I read them, so I was able to really devote some bandwidth to it. But I have a sibling who is in vocational ministry, and I texted him and I said, you have to read this. Like, not even because you need to personally change your mind. I mean, he's open. He's not as sort of progressive as I am, but that I'm aware of. But he's in ministry. If you are in ministry, this is a conversation you need to be a participant in. Whether you ultimately, as the book suggests, change your mind or not, you need to know what's being talked about. Anyway, so it's powerful. It's for me personally, as a happily married heterosexual man, white man with 3 lovely children who really doesn't need a worldview perspective, but yet who's always wrestled because of my associations with what it means to intersect faith and those who claim the identifier of homosexual. It gave me a lot of hope and sort of permission for personally to say, all right, let's kind of do this thing and do this together. So I don't know. It was a really powerful read. I thank you for passing along the book. That was your Christmas gift to me. You're welcome. I apologize in advance for how much it will dominate our conversations off pod in the coming months and probably beyond. But it's in a way that for me, things like Jerzak's Christ Like God, things like Jerzak's Her Gates Will Never Be Shut, Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy, these altars in my personal sort of faith and theology and maturity, like that I can point to and say this was a seminal piece of material that affected and grew me and pushed me and stirred me and heartened me at the same time. So I would definitely encourage investigating it.
Sure. I've been very interested in some of the texts that you've tweeted out and dropped onto Facebook and stuff. I've liked a lot of what I've seen. So yeah, I'm very curious to read that. I know we're running a little long on this edition, but I have one more thing that I'm just dying to talk about, and then we'll get into then we'll satiate the hunger, as it were. I went to see, and had we recorded like 2 days earlier, this wouldn't be a topic of conversation, but I went to see a new flick called The Greatest Showman. So I loved this movie. I loved this movie so much. And I would even objectively, like, I've read some criticisms about some of its like narrative beats and a little bit of its, baptizing of history and stuff like that. And I agree with all of those. Here's what I love about it. So I'm by no means a prude. I mean, we launched a podcast where we talk about Christianity and the horror genre, and then I suggested that we watch Reanimator. And so I'm by no means a content prude, as it were. But I will say that I find it so, I'll say painfully rare to see a film that is family friendly. So this is rated PG movie. It's utterly clean, but is still made for adults and deals with adult issues. That is not just like, a new kids film that everybody gets to see, and is also not like a Hallmark movie or, please forgive me, listeners, like a faith-based movie, that it's outside of those realms. This is a major...
You do know we're talking about the movie Raw today. I really don't think you need to ask the forgiveness of our listeners for not endorsing faith-based movies.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. But it was just really refreshing to see a story that also, Nathan, and this is why I'm really urging you to try to carve some time to take your family to see it. It is utterly void of cynicism. It is a burst of wholehearted, open-armed, just bounteous acceptance of who you are and of your place in the world, and it is lovely and beautiful. It's also got a lot of touchstones to like creative ambitions and ambition itself. And we've talked before, what you've coined the legacy of art versus the legacy of family. It has some very lovely and inspiring things to say about that. I loved it. And if people came out of it and were like, oh yeah, it was just like the story was just a blah, 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 I would be like, you know what? I probably agree with you. I loved it. And I cried 20 times. Right. And I just like, it is just an utterly wonderful burst of cinematic joy, and I hope it makes a ton of money because I love that they did this. It's from the people who, I guess, the lyricists and musicians of La La Land, but La La Land left me feeling a little ambivalent. Like I liked it, but it didn't reach the heights that its accolades portrayed to me. Greatest Showman did all of that and more. Like I have been so moved in the last couple of days just thinking about this film and its story and everything like that. So I personally wholeheartedly endorse it. I want everybody to go see The Greatest Showman.
Well, and it's funny, I haven't seen it yet, but I did watch that rehearsal footage of Jackman singing that song, and it's so incredible. And maybe we'll post it. But I just love Hugh Jackman, and seeing him just in his zone, like it's thrilling. So
well, and I remember I'll say this, like, yes, we should post it to the Facebook page. But listeners will be like, "What in the world? The fear of God posting this Greatest Showman thing?" Blah, blah, blah. But I'm telling you, it's awesome. I remember when I sent it to you, I had said, if you've ever wondered what it was like to see the spirit hit Hugh Jackman and then watch the spirit hit the room. It is powerful, unbelievable. Like it, and you see it sweep over. And I remember saying, and this will be the last thing I say about it, but I remember saying of that rehearsal footage specifically, I was like, I was watching, and I say this with no disrespect whatsoever to the sanctity of this actual act, but there were moments of worship in that, like pure, unadulterated worship. It meant something to the people in that room that were singing it, and you can see it on their faces, and you can see it, you can hear it in their voices, and it is powerful. It is absolutely wonderful, and and that is layered. that is very much the spirit and heart of the film as well. It's fantastic. I love it. I love it very much. So that was yet another edition of what you watching, what you reading, what you listening to. Don't try to sing with your voice. No, I don't even mean when you're sick. Like, don't try to sing with your voice.
Yeah, just with the voice I have, just in normal life. Don't bother.
Don't do it.
That message came through loud and clear my sophomore year of high school when, actually my junior year of high school when I was cast in a production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown as Snoopy. They wanted me so badly as Snoopy, but knew I didn't sing well. They took away my songs and wrote Woodstock into the play.
Oh my gosh! So that Woodstock
so they
would
could
sing.
then cast Woodstock and sing Snoopy songs with me, just kind of backing up and acting the fool.
Oh my gosh!
So yeah. Maybe that's why I'm so envious of Hugh Jackman and don't traditionally like musical theater, because I just can't do it. So speaking of cynical things,
yes,
or
indeed.
relatively so, I'm sure we'll figure something out here. So we are talking today about the movie Raw, which I don't know what trivial bits you have. I found one little.
I really
one
only have one. Yeah.
What's yours?
Mine is about what the meat in the fridge is made of. Is that yours?
Oh, I don't have that one at all. What I do have is that apparently during the Toronto Film Festival, some viewers received emergency medical services after allegedly fainting from the film's graphic scenes, which I would totally believe because I kind of wanted to faint, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah, it's pretty graphic. And you know what's interesting about it is that this film does have, I mean, we'll just go ahead and say for listeners who listen to us before seeing the film or to find out if they want to see the film, it's got 3 moments of, well, it's straight up about cannibalism. I mean, let's just call it out. Like it's straight up about cannibalism. It's got a few moments of actually seeing that happen. And those moments, although not utterly, I think part of why they're so unsettling is how realistically they're done and how almost, I'll use the word restrained. It's like they're restrained just enough for you to think it's almost real. And that's, at least that was my experience of it. Because I've seen films, zombie films, and even films where things like that were happening and people are being devoured, but it's taken to such an absurd level that it's like, okay, well, clearly that's it's gross or scary or whatever, but clearly that's fakery. Whereas
this is a very naturalistic approach to
absolutely. And I think all the more
cannibal genre.
Right. And I think all the more uncomfortable as a result. But yeah, I did know that some people had some trouble holding their lunch down, as it were. But interestingly enough, there's a scene where she pulls raw chicken out of the fridge and just begins devouring it. And people said, like, oh, did that put you off meat? And she was like, well, it was made of like candy wax and sugar. So it really put me off of sugar. She's like, I'm having to chew all of these things, and it's very sweet. But she said it was more nauseating to think about sugar than it was to think about meat.
Well, what's funny about this is my wife, in just the last 6 months or so, has made a sharp pivot towards vegetarianism for a number of different reasons. But for her, it's very much rooted in the ethics of the thing, and I applaud her for that. At the moment, at least, I am not. I have adapted a little bit that direction, but by no means, full forced. And the moment's going to come where you're going to receive a phone call from my wife thanking you for turning me into a vegetarian because of stupid crap like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and this.
That's right. That's right.
Good grief, man.
Yeah, it's true. And the film is quite harrowing in that regard. But that was the one big thing is that it's like, I heard about it, and of course people hear coming out of the festival, oh, somebody fainted while watching this movie, and so they it's kind of like a challenge to horror fans, like, oh, can I handle it? Can I watch this movie? But one of the things that was interesting is that when I watched it, it really is, I think it's got some very interesting things to say. And I think that the director is a very intentional director, and I think I think because I've watched a couple of interviews that she's done on like the festival circuit and everything, and I think she's intentionally trying to be vague about, hey, what the metaphor is at the center and what this all adds up to and means. But there's a couple of key things that she's kind of playing with that I think are really interesting, and I think she likes the idea, at least what I gleaned from the interviews that she's given about the film, she likes the idea of putting something out there, and I think she is quoted, I'm going to butcher the quote a little bit, but the idea that she said films don't have to be neat. They can be a little messy, and they can be a little complex in what they do to you. They make you feel a thing. They make you think about certain things, and why did that moment resonate with you, or why did that other moment gross you out, or why did that other moment offend you, or something like that, and make you start thinking about the kinds of reactions that you have and why you would have them. So she did write and direct this film, so this is very much like an auteur's film. This is her story, her vision, as it were. So the
biographical.
I don't know, man. I hope not. But the basics, as it were, are that this woman who is a vegetarian, she is going to college for the first time, the same veterinarian school that her sister goes to. So she's a vegetarian and studying to be a veterinarian. It's going to be difficult to get those to not mix those two words up. But so she is studying to be a veterinarian, and her sister goes to school there. But on like the first week, older sister, yes. On like the first week, she is part of this intense and somewhat disgusting hazing ritual that the older students, the upperclassmen, put all of the new freshman students through. And so, as part of this, she has to eat a raw, I believe it's duck kidney.
No, it's rabbit.
Rabbit. She's got to eat a raw rabbit kidney. But of course, she's a vegetarian, so she's like, I can't do that. She's talked into it. She's coerced. Her sister does it. She's coerced into doing it, not forcefully, but like peer pressure coerced. So, and then she eats it. That night, she breaks out into a full body rash. She has a severe, almost allergic reaction to it. But the worst part is that from that moment on, she finds it nearly impossible to satisfy her hunger, specifically for raw flesh or for raw meat. And so, yeah, there's a couple of moments in there. There's one moment where after her...
primarily of the human variety, though. I guess it's a little bit of both, you know.
She actually only eats the one thing, like that moment where it really sort of turns a corner. And I know this is like, for many people, was like the scene that got them, was, you referenced it jokingly earlier in your introduction to me, but like when her sister accidentally cuts her finger off. What is her? I gotta look over her name. Justine, the main character. Let's just say she finds the finger appetizing. So we're just gonna leave it at that. You can imagine where that goes. They blame it on the dog, but it's just like it's very unsettling when that happens, because you can see this sort of weird zoning out face come over Justine, and she just eats this thing. But then that develops into what I think is the most interesting element of the movie, and why I so badly wanted to talk about it, because the next sort of major, her sister's name is Alexia, and the next sort of major turn in the film is when she realizes that Alexia is also this thing, and that Alexia has actually been orchestrating car accidents so that she can rapidly swoop in and kind of get a taste of the victims, you know, enough to kind of cover her own tracks. And so Justine, our main character, is horrified by this and swears off that she's ever going to do this again. She swears that she's never going to engage in that again. And that's what I find so interesting about the movie, is that then the film kind of plays out, and there's a couple of other surprises that come along the way, but the film kind of plays out as this interplay of somebody who is willfully sort of giving in to their desires to do this tremendously abnormal thing, and someone who is actively squashing that same desire. And I found that very interesting. I know you're, I'm trying to be respectful as I can to your voice, but also respectful to our listeners.
I want to talk.
I know, to not dominate the conversation. So what did you think in general? I don't have any more trivial bits, so we can get into kind of likes, dislikes if you want.
As a precursor to that, I had a really funny experience watching this movie, where, and maybe we'll put this on the Facebook page too. There's going to be a lot of new content on the Facebook page this week. Are you familiar with the old SNL bit, Massive Head Wound Harry?
It rings a vague bell, but I wouldn't be able to speak to it.
It's so disgusting, but the moment when she's chomping on brains basically made me think of this, because in this old SNL bit, I think it's Dana Carvey. It's so awful. He's this character, Massive Head Wound Harry, and he just has this disgusting prosthetic on his head, like a makeup prosthetic.
Yeah,
and he shows up at this party, and everyone is just disgusted by him, but he's just trying to fit in and be part of the party. And I don't know why this happens. I can't remember why this happens in the sketch, but he goes and lays on the couch. Well, there's a real dog in the scene, and who comes over to the character, and whatever they used as application for this prosthetic must have attracted. The dog starts gnawing on the prosthetic and pulling on it, and the actors start corpsing in the scene, no pun intended, because it's definitely not supposed to be happening. This dog starts yanking on this gross prosthetic. It's so disgusting.
Oh,
but that's what this movie made me think of, is Massive Head Wound Harry.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to look that up. We'll put it on the Facebook page.
We'll throw it up there. I'll cut to the chase a bit here. I did not really enjoy this movie, but the questions I had before the connections you just made for the listener reveal themselves, I was like, is this movie saying be a vegetarian? Is this movie saying don't be a vegetarian? Is this movie saying don't be a veterinarian? Is this movie saying be a veterinarian? Is this movie saying all veterinarians are cannibals? Like, I really was like, I don't even know what on earth is going on with all these people. Because now, what's your sort of experience with the movie? Did you watch it more than once in order for the podcast?
I've seen it twice now. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So the first time I saw it was just because I had seen it as a result of the waves it made at the festival circuit. So
right.
I was just interested in, seeing what this was about. So when Netflix got it, I believe at the top of 2017, like early in 2017, it was a pretty quick watch for me to seek that specific film out. And I remember, like, through most of the movie, I was like, okay, like I kind of see the metaphor that they're going for, or at least see what I think the metaphor is, and it's interesting. It's definitely a very intentional film, and the artfulness of the film is noteworthy. But it wasn't until the final scene, which I'll get to in theme, it wasn't until the final scene that I was like, oh dang, like that. The final scene really got my brain going about a few things that I think the film was playing with throughout its narrative, and I'll speak to those.
Maybe in the parlance of the movie, did it get your stomach growling? Is that what happened?
Right. It got my appetite whetted.
Well, I ask about the your experience with it, because watching it the first time, and I didn't know, I didn't read a synopsis, I didn't watch a trailer. In fact, until it started, I didn't know it was foreign. I mean, I'm just like, okay, it's raw. I got to watch it. Here we go. I imagine I'll be grossed out. Here we go. But I didn't know if we were entering some sort of cult scenario that she was just our point of view character for.
Oh, I see.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, because it's not super clear, like, who's doing what, how many people are doing what. Is this some kind of weirdo, vet school that they turned, like the rabbit kidney that everybody has to eat, turn people into I really had no idea what was going on. So that's where all those questions came up. So I don't know. Like, I'm sure some positive conversation will be yielded, because that's what you and I do, but I don't envision watching this ever again. But getting into likes, dislikes, which sounds like I absolutely hated it. I'm not saying that. It's just, in fact, my first note on likes dislikes is I hate body horror movies.
Yes, you do. You do.
Like-
I've known that. I've
like
known
I
that
just-
about you. Everybody, go revisit our Reanimator and May episodes, and you'll know how Nathan feels about this subgenre of
Well, which
horror.
is funny because you made this point a minute ago, because I thought watching it, I was like, I don't really have a problem with things like Walking Dead and stuff like that, but it's so unnatural the way it's presented
Yeah,
and stuff
right.
like that.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
when you have these like body horror, naturalistic, kind of disgusting, like here's the viscera attached psychologically to chewing on a fresh human finger. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I really was not interested in that feeling.
I would be hard pressed to find it. I think the only body horror film that we've done on the show that you've actively liked, even still, I think grossed you out to pieces, was The Fly. I think that's the only one that I can think of that you actively liked that movie, but definitely were very grossed out by it. Of course, that movie's amazing, so it doesn't surprise me.
Well, but there's something about The Fly that, because of the intersection it has with like animal body, I don't know, like you are correct. It is a body horror movie, would qualify unequivocally as that. And it is disgusting and it's hard to watch, but it's a little more, dare I say, palatable than body on body horror. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something unsettling. I thought about this many times. Like for me, the idea of
granted, I do love our conversation on The Fly, and everyone should go listen to it.
Yes, it's very funny. It's very funny. But there's something about the idea of cannibalism that
just appeals to you.
they're polar opposite. There's something about it that unsettles me in a way certain other things we talk about don't. There are certain things that, obviously, we're dealing with the horror genre, so we're dealing with a lot of aberrations. We're dealing with a lot of just grotesque, macabre things. But there is something about, like, there have been times where even though my palette for all things horror is usually pretty wide, there have been certain specifically cannibal movies that I've been very nervous to even watch, just because, like, some of the things I've seen, I'm like, I don't know if I can entertain that. I don't know if I can get into that. So I was a little worried about this film. And again, I think this film has some thematic richness that really elevates it above most other films that would be classified in this genre. And then also the moments of that said thing are there's only 3 moments of it in the film, and they're kind of spread out, so it doesn't bombard you with that element of the film. Although some people fainted and needed vomit bags.
I sincerely, like, I don't blame them. It is rough. It will turn your stomach and crawl your skin and blah.
Yeah.
I did have some likes, notably Alex with her arm up a cow's rear end. That was beautiful.
Wow.
No, in all seriousness, I loved the opening scene. I mean, and honestly, it. I think I have relative ideas of where you'll go thematically. I don't know that I will as readily endorse them, not because of an ultimate dislike for the movie. I don't know that. Anyway, the opening scene, the way it's shot and executed, for me personally, set me up for a little bit more interesting take than what I feel like I got, if that makes any sense. Because that opening scene is really strong.
Yeah, I agree. You're talking about the one in the restaurant, right? Or are you
the
talking
opening
about
scene?
No, you're talking about the car
the
wreck.
very opening scene. Yeah.
Yeah. The car wreck. Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just because it's so like, what just happened? I don't know what I'm getting into now. That was really, and it's rather skillfully shot.
No disagreement there. Ironically, this film does what I praised Mother for not doing last time, which is show us something that happens in the middle of the movie at the very beginning. I'm gonna challenge you there personally. Okay.
Which ultimately it doesn't matter, but I don't think that's what happens in the middle of the movie. I think that is Alexia's just activity, and we just don't understand it yet. We don't have context for it yet.
I could buy that. Yeah, I could accept that.
Because I'm with you. The movie does not traffic in like alternate narrative forms. It's a straightforward movie to me, it was just, here's the thing, you have no context for it, but isn't it interesting and piquing your curiosity? We're not really going to know what that means until much later.
I could buy that. I'll adopt that. I'll go ahead and adopt that. I don't really have very much in the way of likes, dislikes, except because most of what I would praise about the film and most of what really drew the film to me, I would mention in either scares or themes. So I don't have anything specific there.
Okay, well, cool. I do have some on this list, and truthfully, they aren't all dislikes. What I wrote down is, other than knowing and still being bosom friends with you, this movie illustrates a perfect reason why I'm glad I went to a tiny liberal arts Christian college. The hazing of the first hour, I was like, this is wretched and terrible. I'm also glad that the apocalypse will happen before my kids hit college age, so that they aren't indoctrinated in this hellhole.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It was terrible. It was terrible. It was terrible. I was like, oh my God, is that what college is actually like for people?
I know.
Oh God, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, not my experience.
Here's a question for you. Well, I'll backdoor into that. So, I do think it's a narratively clever piece. Like, it is. At multiple moments, I thought this is a strong script. Like, just some of the lines, some of the interplay between Justine and Alex was reflected a verisimilitude of their relationship that you just don't always see. I was really impressed with the screenwriting. Oh man, I had another thought there in terms of cleverness. But here's a question for you. What significance do you take away from the rash that she undergoes? Like, what? I'm a little confused by that. Ultimately,
it's really difficult to sort of parse out, because it feels like everything means something, but because you're given so few through line clues, it's difficult to really get a handle on it. I just kind of took it as her transformative reaction that she's entering into this other. I took it as almost so she's molting. She's molting.
No, well, I'm not being totally funny. Is that what you mean? Well,
kind of. I would actually equate it more to a physical manifestation of what people would go through, like kind of a rapid stage puberty, if you will. So it was one of those things where, for me, when I saw that rash, it's like, okay, well, now this appetite, this desire is in her, and her body is responding to the awakening of that thing. But it's happening for her extremely rapidly, like in the course of an evening, and then by the time she goes to the doctor, it's already peeling, which is gross in itself. But but yeah, that's the way I took it. Is this this just this transformative representation of now she's got this thing in her, and it's woke up as it were.
Well, and yes, and I think I would totally agree with that. It was just because, like you said, the dots really aren't connected for you. And this is, I mentioned a second ago that I lost my train of thought. The narrative, the cleverness of the narrative, like, again, as wretched as much of the visuals are in this, and the general content and subject matter, the script is strong. And even moments like when Alex wakes up after she accidentally cuts her finger off, you're genuinely like, that is an unexpected reaction. You know what I mean? Like her,
right. Yeah.
And to learn of her was I was like, oh, well, that's, again, ignoring the actual state of what they share.
There's some real surprises in the movie that are effective. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would also say that this is one of those films that I was not frustrated by the vagueness, but I actually kind of like it, because it makes me it makes me dig for it a little bit. It makes me try really hard to call out to your statement earlier. It makes me try to have a conversation with the film and with other people who have seen the film to try to figure out what it is that I'm going after. So it's not purposefully vague to the point of frustration, at least not for me. It really is inviting this sort of, what are these metaphors? What do these moments mean to you or to these characters? And I like...
Well, and similar to Like It Comes at Night, like there's a purpose to what you might experience in terms of frustration. I did write down should be in scares, when the dad says, don't have 2 girls, honey. It's too hard. I was like, oh my God, what about 3? 3? Does that dodge a bullet?
Three's fine.
So easy now.
Yes.
Right.
3's fine. They take care of themselves.
One dislike, and then we can move on to scares and whatnot. For as intentional as I feel like the script ultimately is, I do feel like there's a real clear missed opportunity in terms of just kind of payoffs, setup and payoffs. When so we're gonna spoil the movie. Just I mean, like most of you probably aren't gonna watch it after this conversation anyway, based on the subject matter. So
That's all right.
we're just gonna spoil it. Throughout the film, Justine develops a relationship, a friendship that's a sort of sexual friendship, a relationship with a gay roommate named Adrian.
Right.
And late in the movie, like pretty much the climactic sort of scene or sequence in the movie is she has a really traumatic night. Well, she wakes up next to him, and you think, okay, well, they must have slept together, and this is just her waking up from that. Well, come to find out he's dead in a rather dramatic fashion.
Yes.
And you find out that, spoiler alert, Alex is the one who did it, and she had stabbed him with an item that's you see more than once in the movie, and then she devoured his leg, and he bled to death while he slept. It was disgusting. But my quibble, because I feel like it's right there, and maybe it's an indicator I should write more, but do you remember the scene at the very top of the movie when she gets to school and they watch the horse being tranquilized?
Yes.
For what feels like the metaphorical nature of the movie, I didn't understand why, script-wise, they would not have called back to that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, instead of, because she stabs him with a ski pole shows up earlier in the movie, but it doesn't, to me, the ski pole itself has no real thematic resonance. It just is an article in the movie.
Right.
It's kind of like Chekhov's gun, if you will. Whereas the treatment of animals, the consumption of animals, the putting down of the horse, that's all very thematically resonant. So it stuck out to me when it's revealed what happens to Adrian, because I totally thought, oh, she tranquilized him with the horse tranquilizer.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You see what I'm saying? Like, it felt like an odd note to kind of miss. Anyway,
sure.
Again, it's just sort of a passing glance there.
An observation. Yeah. Well, what's interesting, you bring up this thing about animals, and obviously they are all at a veterinary school. But what's interesting is I do think the film is going, and I have heard a handful of interviews with the director, but I haven't heard a lot of substantial information, nothing that I would glean off of without crediting to her. But I think one thing for me is there is a very sort of an animal quality to their behavior. There's an animal quality to the behavior of the humans in the film.
Sure.
And not only in the degree of just like the main thing that they all wind up doing, which feels like a very animalistic thing, but also like in the way they carry themselves and in their body posture and the way they stand in the scenes in the club. Sometimes you'll see her, specifically Justine, as the movie progresses, she's in a pose that is very reminiscent of like a cat or some sort of animal. So I do think that there's, although I would be hard pressed to put nice little tight bumper stickers on it at this moment, I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in the interplay between us as being human beings and then animals. And then Justine has that I think it's super interesting, although initially it's rather weird and off-putting. It has that super interesting conversation right after the hazing where she talks about how monkeys are self-aware. And, she talks about that. And
monkey rape.
That was such a disgusting. Listeners are going to have no context if they haven't seen the movie. So yes, they're debating about. You'd have to see the movie to know how this whole subject comes up and everything. But they're debating about the violation of a monkey, and she's talking about how monkeys are self-aware and all this other sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of touch points. Even there's a couple of times where she's going through something and then she envisions like that horse on the treadmill, like there's a lot of callbacks to sort of animal behavior and animal feelings. And I think what I got out of that, my personal touch point for that was that the director is making a statement about the animalistic nature of human beings, and just sort of the animal instincts and appetites that we have at play. Let's go through a couple of scares, if you don't mind. I have one.
I do, but I'll do it.
I have two major ones. I'll mention the first one, and then I'll pivot to you. It is pretty harrowing. The night of her, I'll call it the withdrawal moment, where she's decided to go off meat, and so then she has that moment where she's covered in the sheets, but she's envisioning the whole people are like coming after her. Is a very harrowing moment, very frightening, and it's pretty upsetting. Even though she's making what she considers to be an almost moral choice to give this away, you can see what her body's going through to not consume any more of it. And yeah, that was a pretty frightening moment. What did you have listed down for scares?
Hairball.
Oh, that was a gross. Golly.
That's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in a movie ever.
Yes.
Ever.
I don't know how that actress did that. Like, honestly,
I don't either. I don't want to know.
No, I don't know either.
Well, because it's the sustained nature of it. It's like,
yeah, it just keeps coming.
Immediately, listeners, if you don't watch the movie, which again, for very different reasons than Mother, I would not necessarily encourage, but there's a scene where she's just starting to understand and sate this newfound appetite of hers, where she's chewing her hair while talking to a professor, and she's chewing it with great vigor.
Yeah.
And the scene immediately following it, she rushes into the bathroom and vomits up a hairball for a sustained literal minute at least. Like
yeah. It keeps going forever. And
unbroken, and it is vile and disgusting and so gross. And I wish I'd never seen it.
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
And I want to suck my thumb in a corner. So yeah, that was one. I made a joke about it earlier, but I never had any interest in watching with such clarity a Brazilian wax take place.
Oh my gosh, that's a nerve-wracking.
Although what I did write down, so listeners like, no, well, I mean, it's humorous, but it's not like it's a Brazilian wax. It doesn't get much more sort of invasive. A Brazilian wax is ladyscaping, as opposed to manscaping. It's ladyscaping, and it's a French movie, so she's got body hair, and the sister is assisting in this first Brazilian wax, and it's so wretchedly uncomfortable scene that culminates with the sister having a difficult time completing the removal of some of this wax. Which leads,
how careful you're trying to be in describing.
Yeah, which leads to the scene of the finger getting cut off, and it just pivots away. What I wrote down is, I was like, did she ever get the rest of the wax off? Like, inquiring minds want to know. Like, this is a loose end that I need to know what happened. You put me through that hellish torture, and you didn't pay it off with knowing if she actually got all of the wax off.
Oh my gosh, that is terrible.
So disgusting. Yes, it is. I know it is. I mean, I don't know, but my observation indicates that it would be terrible.
the very thought is enough to put me off of it just entirely. Well, the other sort of really scary moment that I had is just, you referenced earlier that she wakes up from a very traumatic night. Just that whole evening, the events of that night, like when the video footage of her when they're like teasing her with the corpse, and it's just it's gruesome and disturbing.
She gets super drunk at a party, like stupid drunk, and the sister sets her up and humiliates her with some video footage of her doing wretched things, and she doesn't find out until the next morning.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult.
Well, at that specific party, what I wrote down is licking that dude's eyeball. Did you see that sequence?
Oh, yes.
That's so gross.
Yes.
I mean,
very gross.
Again, as much as I will never watch this movie again, there is a nice attention to detail other than the wax. What happened? But there's this moment where she's wandering through a party and she's moving amidst all these people, and in the foreground there's this couple, and the camera just zooms in and then ultimately past them. But as it's zooming towards and ultimately past them, the female in the coupling is licking the actual eyeball of the male, and I was like, oh my God, like this is so gross.
Yes. Well, and my final scare that I would mention is probably a nice little pivot to theme. I did find, as I'd mentioned earlier, the final scene to be pretty arresting and
the dad.
Yes, the scene with the dad, the revelation with the dad. So to tell listeners what that is, so that then we can talk about it. Do you mind if I take the lead on theme this time around?
Nope.
So the father at the very end, what happens is, as we mentioned earlier, this friend that Justine has made, she wakes up one morning and she finds him dead in the bed, and it is revealed that her sister Alex killed him and devoured at least a good portion of him. And then her sister Justine, like, cleans Alex up, and then after bathing her and getting her sort of cleaned up from everything, then the next moment is her behind a glass partition in like a jail cell, in like a prison. So you realize that Alex is going to go to prison probably forever, I would imagine, for this horrendous thing that she's done. Well, the very final scene of the film is Justine sitting at a dinner table, and the mom has some kind of weird and distanced reactions, and then the mom gets up and leaves. And then the dad starts in on this thing where he says, like, it's not your fault. And Justine's like, I know it's not my fault. But then, because the mom and dad, to Justine's awareness, the mom and dad have no idea that she has this cannibalistic urge. So they now know about Alex, but they have supposedly no idea that Justine struggles with this, suffers with this. But then the dad, in a very, I have to give some huge props to this writing, because I did not see where this was going. I had no idea why the dad was saying these things or where it was all going to wind up. But the moment it's sort of made clear what he's saying, it's very skillfully done. But the dad just starts talking about how, when Alex was younger, she was his little princess and she should have studied philosophy or whatever. And then he says she just couldn't stop being herself. And when he says she just couldn't stop being herself, he starts talking about their mother. And when he starts talking about their mother, the mom and dad went to the same veterinarian school. And they met there, and they fell in love there, and he got married and all this other sort of stuff. But when he talks about when he fell in love with their mother, he says, and then we had our first kiss, and he's toying with his lip. He has a hair lip, which tons of people have a hair lip. So you don't really think about, that's just a normalcy for a lot of people. They're born with, I believe it's called a cleft palate, and so they have to fix that with this hair lip. So, but then when he says, but then we had our first kiss, and he's specifically sort of fingering this hair lip quality, for me in that moment, I was like, oh crap, like what does that mean? And then he methodically unbuttons his shirt, and when he unbuttons his shirt, as he's saying, like, we never could find a solution, and then he opens his shirt to reveal a just complete wall of scars and bite marks and all kinds of I'll just say chunks missing from him. And he says, with this almost defeated resignation, he says to a very horrified Justine, he says, "I'm sure you'll find a solution, honey." And then, cut to credits. like that's the final sort of reveal of the film, is that this is actually a somewhat hereditary trait. That's part of the reason, you can presume, that's part of the reason why her family was urging her to be a vegetarian, and always indoctrinated her with that, because the moment you taste it, then it's gonna become an insatiable appetite. And that was really something that stood out to me for the film as a whole, because as I mentioned earlier, you have a character like Alex who is kind of diving in and digging into these impulses, and she is causing Rex.
Can I cut you off real quick? Because I don't want you to get too far down the field and then do it and undercut where you're going, but I wanted to comment on that final scene, which clearly is going to feed a lot of your themes, and so I want you to be able to get there with richness. in as much as you, it seems we're stoked and sort of, propelled by that final scene, I had a momentary flash of that's clever, and it was immediately undercut by that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, it didn't work for me because to me it made zero sense. Again, like this is a purely objective kind of me. It wasn't me attempting to nitpick, but this is what came to me was I don't believe that we Justine is at least 18 years old. I just don't believe she would never have seen her father shirtless. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
oh, I see what you mean.
Like, and so it really, I understood what was being scratched at thematically.
Sure.
It was just like, well, that's pretty implausible to me, but whatever, Sure.
Well, and I can see what you're going for there. But if we take the notion in the film, that she never had. One of the things that I found so interesting about it is that, as I mentioned, that like Alex, her sister, is completely uninhibited with these desires. She causes wrecks and satiates these desires, and she just does it. But Justine makes a very active decision in the film to not do this. She just chooses to not continue to further this meat indulgence. And I found that extremely interesting in the general conversation about appetite, as it were, just as human beings. We've talked on this show before about when we talked about zombie films to any degree. We talk about just the insatiable appetites that can develop in our own hearts. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about the way that we talk about certain appetites is it's almost like there's a like the appetites themselves justify their utter indulgence with no restraint. It depends on who you talk to and what reading you talk to. Let me use this interplay. There's plenty of people who would balk at the idea of like restricting certain things that you have a desire to fulfill. There's a notion in the popular culture today that if you have this desire, you should go out and fulfill this desire because the desire is there and it's real and it's justified because it's there and it's real. But there are plenty of things that if people do that, we're horrified by them. We are utterly, in shock that somebody would even remotely entertain the notion of giving in to this abnormal desire. I'm thinking about, like in the film, it's cannibalism. In the film, it's this idea of like, wow, really? You have an impulse to eat people? Well, you can't do that. That's not like, that's not, there's no way that you could do that. The other thing that comes to mind is just certain boundaries within sexual intimacy may seem to others to be like, well, you absolutely can't go there. That's to a level of a kind of a perverted nature. And I find two basic camps, and I find basically the camp that I would in this film put Alex in, and the camp that I would put Justine in, and the camp that Alex is in is basically like, oh, so this is a desire that I have, therefore I need to satisfy it because it's there and it requires my attention. But then there is something within Justine that says, no, there is something off about this. There's something that we should not necessarily be engaged in. And I just found it very interesting. And the basic conversation that I wanted to have for however many minutes we can have it is just basically this idea that there are certain things that I don't believe we should necessarily engage in. There are certain things that I don't think there's some appetites that I don't think necessarily need to be fed. Does that make sense? I think there are some impulses that we have that I think there's a popular mode of thinking these days that says, if it's there as an appetite, you should satisfy it. And I just, this film made me, I was challenged and provoked in the sense of really sort of thinking about this idea of like, well, because the film is playing off of this whole notion of what is normal and what is not, what is average and what is not. And so when the father reveals this and says like, oh yeah, you have this gene, and then tells her like, I'm sure you'll find a solution to it. It just really struck me, the fact that this man in this movie would be living in an ongoing relationship with something, and to him, he's just normalized this aberration. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
He's normalized this thing that most people, this cannibalism that most people would consider to be horrendous, but he's normalized it, and it got me just spiraling down this path of thinking about different ways in which we as people, as human beings, we can sometimes justify our own appetites simply because they exist. In other words, because I want this thing, I am entitled or should be able to have it. Is that making any sense, or am I just spiraling like Raw into some metaphysical, metaphorical place?
No, I mean, I do think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. I think what I find difficult with this particular movie, though, and what you're going for, is the appetite in question is so specific and so, to use your word a minute ago, aberrant, that it's hard to like, in other words, the way the movie ends, regardless of the plausibility factor a minute ago, but the way the movie ends with the dad's revelation, it's kind of like, well, this is just who she is. We've made it work. You'll figure out a way to make it work too. Like,
right. Well, I got the impression that he's saying you'll figure out a way to stop it, because he talks about it as if it's a problem, but a problem that they have not solved.
Well, I think he's saying this is our solution. You will find a solution for yourself.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, no, I could see that.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I wrote this down under my themes. My concern, I think here's a concern, because the more you talk, the more I'm like, okay, yes, there are some pushes towards some interesting thematic stuff. I'm just worried that the subject matter is so specific and so off the beaten path that it's hard to analogize it to anything else. Like, for instance, I wrote down the line Adrian says. So Adrian, the gay roommate, they sleep together. Initially, she sort of broaches it on a subsequent day about their sleeping together. And he gets really angry and he says, I'm gay. I didn't hide for 20 years to F girls now. And he storms out.
Right.
Which I'm hopeful the movie is not trying to analogize homosexuality, which, interestingly, based on reading this book, it did, and this sort of behavior but you see what I'm saying? Like, the subject matter of the movie is so troubling and traumatizing and not appropriate or correct that it's hard to then make it work cleanly as a metaphor, which, yes, no metaphor is perfect, no analogy is perfect. Sure. But in that moment, when he says that line, I was like, okay, that feels pretty on the nose, because she's, 20 years old. I'm me. I didn't not be this thing for 20 years to now be this thing. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like, it felt like it was very intentionally trying to weigh the scales in that conversation, in that moment at least. Like, I almost wish, kudos to the movie that there are multiple sort of layers to this, but the thrust of the film as conversation about appetites and indulgences is a little different than what I would have sort of thought, because it's so on the nose. You're at veterinary school. It's about meat consumption. Like,
right.
Part of me would have almost wanted more of a PSA about, you know what I mean? Like, it's so right there that the cannibalism aspect, I don't know. Like, you know, and you made this point a minute ago about the monkey rape conversation, where, so ultimately the movie sides with Justine. I mean, she's your protagonist.
No question. Right.
Well, that particular conversation then is worth a moment's conversation on our part, because she says, when a monk, she's making a plea towards the higher intelligence of certain animal species, and if you were to violate a simian, they have feelings too. They're going to respond to that, and then a listener to her conversation says, "Well, wait a minute. Are you saying?" Effectively, I think she says, "Are you saying raping a monkey is like raping a woman?" And it's crude language, but then she answers, "Well, yes." Mm-hmm. And I'm not stating this. I'm just sort of processing as we're talking in the flesh, as it were.
Oh, wow.
I'm worried there's a little confusion, like maybe on my part, maybe on the movie's part. Like, what I've got written down here is, are we just animals and it takes extra work to civilize? Because I'm not totally sure that is a theme I can sort of buy into. You know what I mean? Like, we are purely just like the monkeys or the whatever, or the dolphins. I'm very much for animal rights and that sort of thing, but like,
sure,
I'm not necessarily going to get on board with we're all the same. We just need to suppress our urges in ways that the animals don't have to. Is this making sense at all? Like, no, I think I'm just saying there's a bunch of stuff at work in the movie, and so I applaud it from that standpoint. It's the subject matter is so specific and so graphic that I don't know. I think I needed a little more direct path to what I think she might be trying to say. I don't know.
Well, and to use your animal analogy, like, I think, I mean, if I were in dialogue with the filmmaker, like, I would say one of the things that I got from this is that the film is constantly showing us how we are like animals and how we are unlike animals. And one of the things that I took away from it is we are like them in that there are a variety of similar appetites that we would call animalistic, as it were. But we are unlike them in that we have a capacity to make, on moral and ethical levels, choices about how and whether or not to satisfy those appetites.
Okay, well, here's a question. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think this is good. And this scratches at the very nature of our conversations. Like, because what you're saying, I'm totally for, and I get it, and I can get with you philosophically there. Mike, I guess my concern is, does the strength of the subject matter somewhat undercut, and I'm not stating it does, I'm just sort of positing, like, does the strength of the subject matter somewhat undercut the value of what I think you're driving at? Does that make sense at all?
Here's why, because of that, again, it's my interpretation, but because of that final scene, I don't think it does. Because I do think, I read in that final scene, this helpless man who did not know how to be above this appetite. And commissioning his daughter, who at least thus far has been able to rise above it, that he's saying to her, like, yes, you will find a solution, honey. Now, I could easily see somebody saying there's a reading of the film where it's just he's defeated and he's being almost ironic when he says that. But I don't know. I don't quite get that. Let me briefly bring in, and possibly with an eye towards winding down, let me briefly bring in the scripture passage that I found for this. And the film makes a direct correlation between this insatiable hunger and sexual behavior. The film makes that correlation because even after she decides that she's not going to eat meat anymore, then when she has sex with her friend, she bites on her own arm. So there's a direct connection that's being made to the two sort of impulses, the two sort of appetites. And here's what I had as a possible scripture verse: 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and 1 Corinthians 6 says in the beginning of verse 12. Paul is talking about attitudes that people have, and he's quoting them, and he says, quote, "I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, you say, but I will not be mastered by anything. You say, food for the stomach, and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body." One of the things that I found very interesting in Raw and in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is the connection that's being made between physical appetite, like food and stomach, and sexual desire. And it was really interesting to me to think about the interplay in Raw of a moral choice being assigned to what someone from the outside looking in would say was an automated impulse, and automated something that had then happened to her biologically. But she's making an active choice. She's making I believe it's in her mind, at the very least, an ethical decision. I will not do this. I am not going to, and one interesting thing, I have read some theories that says that it's, she's really a vampire, or it's a metaphor for all the things sort of stretching into that. The director has officially squashed that. Like, no, she's not a vampire. She's not a werewolf. She's a human. She's a human being dealing with human struggles. And so in that vein, I think about this idea, and I think about this passage where a lot of people say, I have the right to do anything. Well, yeah, that's true, but not everything's good for you. You have the permission, you have the right to do whatever, but it's not all good for you. And some things, and this is the key to that second part of verse 12, but I will not be mastered by anything, because some things, if you feed them enough, they will become strong enough that you now barely have a choice but to feed them. You feed them enough, and then they are going to become overwhelming. And that's where you get into these metaphors of addiction. That's where you get into these conversations about how things can just go too far. You get psychologically and neuropathically, there's the law of diminishing return. I know, right?
That's why we're friends.
But you get this law of diminishing returns, that there are certain appetites that you always have to up the game in order to get the satisfaction. And I think that we don't have the time in this episode, or really in my head the forethought to think or understand, like, this is something that our culture is very much struggling with right now. Is struggling with, where are the boundary lines? What are the too far and this far no further about?
Do you bite their arm or do you bite your arm? Like,
wow. But it is. It's this thing that, like, what do we do? What do we, how far is too far, and where are the boundary lines? Because for a long time, the conversation tended towards, it's a kind of a free-for-all, and what you want is what you can have. And I think a lot of people, in tremendously horrific ways, with bodies left and right in its wake, are realizing that does not work. Right. That there has to be boundaries, that there has to be conditions of restraint, that there has to be some sort of center of standard that says this far, no further, to use other biblical language. And I think that's something worth considering. I think that's something worth reflecting on. I don't even know if this is a case where, hey, the fear of God is just infusing this into the film Raw or not. But that is...
No, I mean, I think... no, I mean, I'll give you some credit there, Reed. You're a thoughtful fellow, and
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. I think, just for me personally, the strength of the graphic nature kind of muddied some of what I think is strong about the movie, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. No, it totally does.
Awesome. Well, in that spirit, my friend, shall we angle towards the one and only
David S. Pumpkins?
I think the third of our trio here.
He has never been more missed than in this conversation.
No.
So as we do on every episode, we measure by a very specific metric of David S. Pumpkins. That we measure it every film that we rate anyway. We rate it by a metric of style, scares, and substance, and then we aggregate that together to give this film a score. So I'll go ahead and start with style for Raw. This was a little tough for me. I think I'm going to land at a 3 for style, because I think it's a very artfully made film. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on, and I think that she's a very intentional filmmaker. But then, yeah, there's a lot of ambivalence to it, and I can only handle so much ambivalence as it is.
I think for me personally, for style, as I normally sort of equate that to a general liking, like, to cut to the chase, I'll give it a 2. I think that it is thoughtful, and it is visceral, and it is a well-made film. Just the strength of it did not make for a pleasant viewing experience.
Sure, understandable. And what would you give it for scares?
I'd probably give it a 4. It is so discomforting and so stomach-churning. If only for the hairball scene alone. That's a 4 right there.
Yes. I think because of the discomforting nature of it, I would land at a 4 as well. It might give someone nightmares if you're really averse to these kind of things, but it's more just sort of disturbing and unsettling. Now for substance, I'm going to land at like probably a 4.5 for this one, because I think there's a lot of fascinating things in it. I think there's a lot of things worth talking about it. I don't even know if we got it right. I don't know if we got the film or interpreted the film in an accurate way. But I think there's a lot of things that you could walk away and have some fascinating discussions about, specifically in the areas that we talked about. And there's a wealth of other things scratching at the film as well. What would you give?
Were you getting a little queasy there?
Sorry.
I think there's a little bowl of rabbit kidneys next to you if you want to throw one of those back real quick.
I finished those.
Oh, good. Maybe that explains a lot. In terms of substance, I mean, I do think I'm going to give it a 3. I think on a pure objective level, I might eke that up a little bit. Eke, not eat. Sure. But I think for me personally, again, the content is so strong that it kind of distracts me from what I think you're trying to say, and I think that's where I would land.
Okay, well, that's actually not half bad. We give, despite our reservations about it and our sort of ambling way that we tried to figure it out, we give it 6.5 David S. pumpkins. That is...
that's legit, you know.
It's not bad. So yeah, that was Raw, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how many of you saw this film, and I don't know how many of you, after listening to this conversation, will even want to see this film, but I do think it's fascinating, and I think if you do decide to check it out, I think it's worth considering some of this conversation that it seems to be having about appetite and indulgence, and how that plays into your own ethics and your own morality. We're gonna bounce right now and give you our stock media outro as we typically do. But the fear of God is the beginning.
Are we going to bounce? We're going to bounce.
Like
bounce.
Tigger.
Are you going to have a sound effect?
Like Tigger out of the boing, 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 boing. Yeah. Sounded like I was kissing the microphone, and utterly.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, I'm going to cut that. I'm probably not. But there's a variety of ways to get in touch with us, because the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation, as we know. So stay tuned to hear how you can get in touch with us. Stay tuned next week for your top favorite films, your top voted films of 2017, your top favorite horror films, and a very special conversation with a very special guest that I'm very much looking forward to. Nathan, thank you so much, even despite being sick, for having this conversation with me. Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
See you guys.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. To continue this conversation, you can follow us on Twitter at The Fear of God. You can visit us on Facebook to comment on one of our posts or post there yourself. You can follow Reed on Twitter at Reed Lackey. You can follow Nathan on Twitter at The Nathan Rouse. Visit morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com, all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.